Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Don Lemon Show. Wait till you hear and see who our next guest is. We have a ton of news to break down, lots of things to talk about. I need to tell you, in the wee hours, the House Republicans passed their big, beautiful bill that will strip health care from millions of Americans. Fallout continues from Trump deranged conspiracy addled rant about South African white genocide in the Oval Office, or so-called white genocide. The Democratic Party has become a circular firing squad. These revelations about this new Joe Biden book, we're going to talk to him about that. So much to discuss. Here's my co-pilot for today, Mr. Scott Galloway, a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business, the host of the Prof G podcast, which is how I originally became aware of him, and the Raging Moderates podcast, which is fairly new, and of course, the Pivot podcast with our dear friend Kara Swisher. Thank you, sir. Good to see you. How you
Good
doing?
to see you, Don. I'm great. It's good to be with you.
Boy, boy, that's a crazy sort of resume. Real quickly before we get to the news, how does it feel? Because you were just, the professor at the Stern School, and now you have this, I don't know if I want to call it newfound fame. I've been seeing you everywhere. Are you comfortable with that?
Uh, it's funny. You say newfound fame. I feel like I've worked my ass off for 30 years to be an overnight success.
Well, that's what
Fame,
people think. That's how people feel, right? I've worked my ass off, and everyone thinks
yeah, it'll
an
all come
overnight
crashing down.
sensation.
America likes to build people up and then tear them down. So I'm waiting.
Don't I
I'm
know?
expecting. Yeah, I'm expecting the tear down part of the program. Look, and you can comment on this. Right now, I have exactly the right amount of fame. And that
Hmm.
is when people recognize me, it makes me feel really good. They couldn't be more lovely. One of the things I hate about AI is it's not crawling the real world; it's crawling the online world. And I think people, generally speaking, in the real world are just lovely and generous. People come up to me. It's a thrill for me when I'm walking around Marylebone, where I live in London, and people come up to me, especially with my boys, because my boys think I'm the lamest person ever. And when people recognize me, it makes me feel important. So I got to be honest, I like it, Don. And people or celebrities who complain about fame, I'm like, well, okay, shut the fuck up for 60 days and no one will care who you are. So if
It's
you're famous
true.
for the wrong reasons, I bet Monica Lewinsky doesn't enjoy her fame. But
Yeah.
I think guys like you and me, I'll put it back to you. I have just the right amount of, I can be anonymous or people are fairly respectful. My privacy, they don't interrupt my dinners. But I have a big ego. I get a lot of reward out of people recognizing me and coming up to me. It makes me feel really nice, and they're generally speaking really lovely to me. So I kind of like it.
It's interesting because if you ask Kara, she would say, "Come on, you're kidding." I don't have a big ego, but the weird thing is that I think I have the right amount of fame, except I get a lot of selfie offers in the middle of the street or on an airplane or in an airport,
Yeah, I got a lot of those too. Yeah,
and even at dinner. And so, it's okay. I'm always nice because I agree with you. I think
it's a small price, right?
it's a small price, but I think it's a compliment. And without those folks, we would not be able to
Hundred
do
percent.
what we do.
Yeah,
So yes, I agree. So listen, I didn't plan on starting here, but let's start here because let's talk about this business just quickly. I just think it's a
sure.
small thing. Put up the thing. This is from the New York Times. And I want you to talk about the business. It's not just to talk about what you guys are doing. I think it's
Oh yeah.
fantastic how Kara Swisher scaled even higher. And this involves you as well. Your picture is not there, but you're a big part of this. Tech journalist and co-host of Pivot with Scott Galloway, novel multi-million dollar podcast contract with Vox Media is in talks with CNN, a series and a slew of other ventures. Listen, you've talked about for the longest time, you've talked about the innovations on the small screen, not the big screen. Now you're doing both of it. Are you surprised at the success that you're having? And talk to me about where this you believe this business is going, because it seems like you got into it at the right time. Timing is everything.
So first off, that article could best be described as a puff piece. I mean, look at the title. He scales are. I mean, when he called me and said, when the guy from the New York Times called me and said, how has Kara emerged as a leader? I'm like, oh, fuck, here we go. And by the way, that picture is in my apartment in Soho. That's my climbing wall that I originally
So,
built for my
oh,
friends.
oh,
And
really?
and then and then the picture of her in the studio is my studio. Pretty soon she's going to start like wearing my socks and hitting my kids. She's going to assume my identity.
Scroll
So
through, Andy, so we can see the. I don't know if you have the rest of it. Yeah, let's see some of this stuff. Yeah, but go on.
Look, I'm very open about the business and economics. I think wealthy people who don't talk about money, I think it's a conspiracy meant to keep the middle and the lower classes down because
Yeah.
I think money is like a skill and you should talk a lot about it. And you should talk to your friends about it and you should,
Mhm.
learn about money. And
Yeah.
So I talk very openly. We started our podcast business 7 or 8 years ago. It was a perfect medium for me because I kind of have a face for radio. I've had 5 TV shows. They've all either been canceled or blocked before they even launched, whereas I've been very successful in podcasting. And the dirty business I think a lot about podcasting. I'm very economically driven. I want to build a big business. But essentially, people who started 8 years ago, like we did, have a natural kind of artificial moat built in. And that is once someone
Yeah.
subscribes on Apple or Spotify, they immediately get downloaded the podcast, and that counts as a listen. So it is so difficult now to break through. If you think about podcasting, it's sort of like that whole NBA thing, the likelihood of a high school basketball player making it to the NBA. There are 600,000 podcasts that put out a podcast every week, 1.6 million. Generously, the top 600 are economically self-sustaining. I don't even think it's that. This is a difficult business. The top 10 podcasts are responsible for a third of the listens. The top 100, two-thirds of all listens. So what you have is a winner-take-all business. I rode crew at UCLA. 11 of us went to the Olympics. There were 2,800 oarsmen and oarswomen, which means I had a 3 times greater likelihood of going to the Olympics than having a self-sustaining podcast, because generously 0.1% make money in podcasting. What you're going to see, though, is an enormous boom in the revenues, because I believe after Trump was essentially elected in large part because of him embracing podcasts, you're going to see a massive flow of capital out of local broadcast news stations, which survive on political spending because all politicians assume all old people vote and old people still watch the local news to get their weather. I think that money is going to flow out of local news stations into podcasts, because podcasts seem to be the new arbiter of how swing voters vote. MSNBC's average viewer is 70. Average podcast viewer is 34. You tell me who politicians want to reach.
Well, and if you look at it, but I know from working at CNN, I think we had the youngest average viewer, and that was in the high 60s, right, for people who watched CNN at the time. Now, listen, that I say that I'm not shitting on corporate media, because it still is very important and it holds a big place in the zeitgeist and it still
Yep.
makes money. But if you look at, as you say, where it's going, you have younger people who are tuning into podcasts. And do you remember that was my prediction when you guys did your New Year's prediction? I predicted that the advertisers would have no other choice but to place their money into where the youth was, and that what I believe was in podcasting and streaming. But you said people who get out of TV. You said something, and I said I got to talk to Scott about that. You said people who leave TV shit on it. I'm like, I'm not shitting on television. I was just talking about what happens in streaming.
So, Don, I'm not exaggerating. I think half your colleagues at CNN have called me and wanted advice about starting a podcast, because
Yeah.
what they realize is they're pilots right now for Pan Am Airlines. They're famous, they're banging stewardesses, they're having a great time, but it's Pan Am in the 70s. They know their days are numbered, and they know that Spirit is going to take their jobs. And everything is moving to other mediums that attracts a younger audience. If a 40-year-old actually accidentally turns on MSNBC, it means someone 100 is also watching. So, in addition to like Life Alert and opioid-induced constipation medication, like who wants to reach a 70-year-old woman? And also, I would argue a 70-year-old woman has already decided who she's voting for, whereas a 34-year-old male, which is the average podcast listener, is a swing voter, because he or she is focused on economics, and economic viability swings between the parties. So my average listener is average household income of 150,000 and is a little bit younger at 32. And most 32-year-old males that make a good living are not enduring advertising. In other words, they're watching Netflix or Spotify. So if you can reach them, like, I get CPMs of 40 to 50 bucks, which is pretty good. And then the other big kind of business issue about podcasts that people don't talk about, these are small businesses. The total business of Pivot and the Prof G universe is about a $20 million a year business, growing 20 to 30% a year. But we only have across all of it probably about 20 full-time employees. So if you're a media company doing $800,000 to $1 million per employee, that's about triple what the big guys are doing, and the means of production is fairly inexpensive. The costs for the studios, the makeup, the top talent at these organizations is exceptional. So if you can be one of those 0.1%, you make an extraordinary living. In addition, all the human capital.
But even that is coming down, though, by the way. They're not making the money. The new
Oh,
contracts
they're getting
not
cut.
making the same. Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. My understanding is the conversations go something like this. Dear famous anchor, we love you and we need you to take a 60% cut and pay.
Yeah, that's
And,
true.
and because the economics are just not there.
Yeah.
The viewership's going down, the attractiveness of the viewership is going down, and the means of production is just really expensive. You can pull together a decent podcast for $500,000, $1 million a year. You do need a talented producer, you do need talented editors, the bar is going up. But if you catch fire and you're one of those top 100 podcasts, what you have is a very small but hugely profitable business. We have EBITDA margins of somewhere between 50 and 70 points. So I'm grateful to have stumbled into this business. I really enjoy it. The other nice thing is it connects in a different way with your listeners because it's a very intimate experience because you are physically
Hmm.
usually in their ear and you are
Hmm.
with them when they're doing something intimate, making breakfast, taking a
Hmm.
dog for the walk,
Oh my gosh.
listening.
But they
Go
also
ahead.
like that. Yes, I mean, some of our highest rated live shows are when we do something interesting. We wanted to focus on for the inauguration. We were like, not we're going to report on the news of the inauguration, but we had to remember this is all, this is also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? The day that and we wanted to honor him.
Hmm.
Um, and this is weird, Scott, but I cooked breakfast in my kitchen and we did a live podcast or did a live broadcast or stream with me cooking and talking about the issues and then, but also honoring Dr. King. It was one of our highest rated. And we're like, this is just, it's kind of whatever you want it to be, but it's just sort of a more intimate, bizarre, I don't know if you would call it wild, wild west, but it just kind of what works for you rather than some singular traditional model. Am I wrong with that?
No, it's people love remember the behind the music stuff on VH1.
I do.
People are going to enjoy. So you give a different version of behind the music. You're a more attractive person. I mean, people want to know about your life. I give behind the music in terms of wealth porn. I tell people exactly how much money my businesses are making, where I lost money in investments, where I made money, and there's an educational component, and people are really interested
Hmm.
in hearing someone speak very transparently about their own financial success and failures. But also the host readovers, you get 2 or 3x the CPM if you're willing to do a host readover. And a lot of
Hmm.
journalists, quote unquote, or media personalities in traditional media find themselves, in my opinion, a little bit precious and would never think of doing a host readover. And I don't. I like talking about the brands I use. We were talking about Z Biotics earlier. I use Z Biotics because I love to drink,
Hmm.
and I'm actually a proponent of alcohol. I think this anti-alcohol movement is the second worst thing to happen to young people behind remote work. And so a lot of these companies, alcohol companies and Z Biotics, reach out to me, and I use it. I like it, and I talk about it. And if you can speak organically to a brand and do the host readover, you get CPMS that even traditional media are kind of jealous of. But yeah, it's all a long-winded way of saying people are interested in knowing more about you behind the scenes, and people, I think, like my stuff because they get very inside, honest, open looks at my investments, my professional life, and the economics.
Well, thank you. And it's a perfect transition for what I'm going to say next. But I don't have any product, by the way, that I don't try and that I don't believe in or that I don't use so far. And look, you're right about this business. We're lucky. If you're lucky enough to have sponsors in this business, it means that you're on the right track. So, Scott, stand by because it's the perfect segue into our a word from our
Make some
sponsors.
money.
Support for the Don Lemon Show today comes from Z Biotics, and I have to tell you about it. It is game changing. It's a product for me. I use this product before a night out with drinks. It is called a pre-alcohol. Z Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists who tackle rough mornings after drinking. So here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It builds up this byproduct, not dehydration. It's the buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that is the blame for those rough mornings after you are drinking. And so this pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. And just remember to make this pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and get a feel um, the next morning that, hey, this is not so bad. I'm doing okay the next morning. I got to tell you, I tried it. We had a big night of drinking, the wine tasting. I woke up, I was fine. Came on and did my live stream with you guys. So here's what you do. You go to zbiotics.com/lemon drops, zbiotic.com/lemon drops to learn more and to get 15% off your first order when you use lemon drops at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. If you're not satisfied for any reason, they're going to refund all of your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/lemon drops and use the code lemon drops at checkout for 15% off. So, thank you to our sponsors. We are pleased to have them. Back now to Scott Galloway. Scott, speaking of what's happening with the media, there's this new book that's out. Speaking, talking about Joe Biden, his alleged mental decline in the, last months or years of his presidency. Um, there are folks who feel very strongly about it, about this book, and say, "Hey, we should have known." There are others who say, "Hey, we should have known, but the time to report on it is not now. It should have been when he was president of the United States." What we should be concerned about is the man who's in the White House, who's tweeting about Beyonce and Taylor Swift at 3 a.m., or who meets with the South African president and espouses conspiracy theories about an alleged white genocide in South Africa. How do you feel about this?
A lot there. I think we elected an insurrectionist because Democrats managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I think there are two
Yep.
primary reasons Trump was elected. One, I think that Democrats ignored the plight of struggling young men. And if you look at the groups that pivoted hardest from blue to red 2020 to 2024, it was Latinos, who should never be categorized into one group. They don't identify as one group. Two, people under the age of 40. For the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. They pivoted hardest in terms of change. And then 45 to 64-year-old women. And my thesis is that's the mothers of some of these struggling young men. Because if your son is in the basement playing video games and vaping, you don't care about territorial sovereignty in Ukraine or transgender rights. I think that Trump brilliantly flew into the manosphere. This was supposed to be a referendum, we thought, on the Democrats on women's rights. Women's rights did not show up. I'm not saying that was the right thing, but that it just didn't show up. What showed up was struggling young men who have fallen further faster than any demographic in the last 40 years. 4 times more likely to kill themselves, 3 times more likely to be addicted, 12 times more likely to be incarcerated. And the far right recognized that and flew right into it. Now, I would argue they conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, and their answer is to go back to the 50s where we were openly racist and misogynist. That's not the answer. But the far left's answer to this crisis of young men and masculinity is to act more like a woman. And I don't think that message resonates either. I went to the Democratic National Convention, as you did, and I saw a parade of special interest groups talking about the very real issues still facing these groups. But I didn't hear one person bring up or talk about the group that has fallen furthest fastest, and that's young men. If you go to the dnc.org website, it says explicitly who we serve. And it lists 16 demographic groups from Asian American Pacific Islanders, the disabled, veterans. I added it up at 74% of the population. When you say you're actively advocating for 74% of the population, you're not advocating for them, you're discriminating against the 26%. And that 26% is squarely young men. So I think ignoring young men was one reason. And the second reason is, and I'll get some hate for this because of the outpouring of deserved goodwill towards the Biden family, Joseph Biden's narcissism. It was insane for him to go back on his word and for his family not to arrest this consensual hallucination and for him to run again. The primary process for Democrats has been an unbelievable process that not only matures the right person, but matures the right person for the moment. Nobody knew who Barack Obama was. Nobody knew who Bill Clinton was. But these people, having gone through the gauntlet of this full body contact, violent experience called the primary, were so toned and ready. So the fact that Biden let his narcissism get the best of him, he had absolutely no business running for a re-election. The fact that the Democratic Party decided to enter into this consensual hallucination, it wasn't a cover-up. It was, Don, I don't know if you have aging parents, but it's easy to see how you enable it. You see them at their best. You love them.
But you don't want to see it. You want to remember them the way that they
Yeah,
were.
you ignore it. You
But
say,
let me just say this, Scott, before you
yeah.
go on. Everyone says that Joe Biden said that he was going to be a one-term president. He never said that. He said he was going to be a transitional president, which would lead you to believe that he wanted to come in, fix things maybe in the first term, and then turn it over to someone else. But he said, I want to be a transitional president, not a one-term president.
It was insane. incredibly narcissistic, selfish, and putting his own ego in front of country for him to contemplate. And I want to be clear, I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking it. I have the receipts here. I was the original ageist. I was on Bill Maher and said he was too old to run, and Bill said, you're an ageist. And I had all sorts of people, including many we know, texting me and saying, Scott, don't you understand the assignment? So what we ended up with was Vice President Harris, who did the best she could given basically a UK election-style timing. And also we ended up with a candidate.
Not a very good team, I believe. I didn't think her team served her well. That's my opinion.
And also, I think she did the best she could given the hand she was dealt. But the bottom line is, she didn't even make it to Iowa 3.5 years before that. Mm-hmm. I believe had we had a full contact primary, we would have matured somebody that would have absolutely cleaned the floor with him. And by the way, it might have been Vice President Harris, and she would have been better and more battle tested. I don't think it would have been her, but we'll never know. Even when he announced he was dropping out, because he had no choice, he wasn't reflecting on what was good for the country. He was told, this is going to be humiliating for you and you need to leave. At that point, I think the Democrats should have had a super kind of Shark Tank-like primary with a debate from 12 candidates, then to 6, then to 4, then to 2. We would have dominated the media cycle, which Trump was dominating 100 days before he was even president. He was acting like president. And I think we would have ended up with who knows who, Shapiro, Buttigieg, Newsom, Whitmer, but somebody would have, in my opinion, had a much better chance. I hate to say this. I think President Biden has ruined his legacy. I think that
you sound like my producer, Peter. And I said, but so many years. And look, I'm not defending, but I'm just thinking that when we look back in the history books, you don't think the years that he spent, the 50 some or however many years it was that he spent in politics before and all the good things that he did, you don't think that's going to I guess, shine than his, deciding not to get out of the race?
It should. That's the fair, correct analysis. What he will be remembered for is the guy that got an insurrectionist elected.
Reelected.
Reelected. This was such, and not only that, the Democratic Party went along with it, and his family went along with it. I think most of us went along with it because we were sort of bullied into it. Mm-hmm. But there was, so where do we go from here? Two things come away from this. We need age limits. We have decided that the 34-year-old doesn't have the judgment, the cognitive ability, the experience to be president of the United States. I know some 34-year-olds who are outstanding, and I think could probably run the country better than either President Biden or President Trump, which means, like a lot of countries, we need upward age limits. We have age limits on pilots, on doctors, on CEOs, but we don't have it for the most important job in the world. So we need an age limit on the upper end. And two, the Democratic Party has to realize that when they decide that Hillary Clinton should be the president, the nominee, and tries to shove everyone out of the door and won't even let certain candidates on the ballot, when they decide that, okay, we're not going to have a primary, quite frankly, they need to embrace the unbelievable mechanism of the primary process. And quite frankly, get the fuck out of the way. And even though you like one candidate, whether it's the Clinton machine or not letting Bernie get his time, let people decide and mature the best candidate for the general.
Let me jump in here because you mentioned, look, I'm all for term limits. And after a certain time, yes. But what age what's the limit? Because you mentioned Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is not a young man, but his ideas are young and they are progressive. And so would you push Bernie Sanders out when I think Bernie Sanders is capable enough to become president and to serve,
yeah,
and have a good term and a good administration? So where do you draw the line?
I think you get together a group of people that are thoughtful, including neurosurgeons, behavioral psychologists, cognitive therapists, and say, okay, 80% of people by the age of 70 no longer have the cognitive function they need to handle whether or not to make quick decisions, get on a plane and fly to Singapore and do trade agreements. There's a couple freebies with benefits, and there will always be isolated incidents. I know a 100-year-old who ran a marathon. That doesn't mean 100-year-olds should be able to ride president. We have, and
let's keep in mind, Donald Trump is only 3.5 or 4 years younger than Joe Biden.
Donald Trump is an obese 78-year-old. That means there's a 1 in 3 chance he dies in office over the next 4 years, which creates a threat to the safety of America that we shouldn't endure. What if Biden was still president? I think the guy's a narcissist and wouldn't have given the reins to Vice President Harris. We'd effectively have this whole apparatus trying to manage and protect him. He had good people around him, but we would effectively not have a president right now. Also, we need to create room at the top such that Senator Schumer, who brightens up a room by leaving it and talks about a strongly worded letter as our pushback against the Trump administration.
You won't get pushback on me for this.
Well,
It's just crazy.
well, our elected representatives have become a cross between the Golden Girls and the land of the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And the analogy is my industry, where tenure has created a faculty where there are too many people who were the bomb in Gap One accounting in 1978 who won't fucking leave the building. And now the downside of that is that it creates a lack of opportunity for young people. Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, the best performing companies in the world have one thing in common. They create a financial incentive structure and a culture where once you hit a certain age, they want you to leave and they want you to retire, which creates more opportunity for young people. There's not enough opportunity for young people to be elected, for young people to have voice in politics, and this does enormous damage to the nation, because the reality is, in about 30 years, when these out-of-control deficits come to really haunt us, when climate change really comes to haunt us in 30, 40, 50 years, 75% of our Congress right now will be dead in 30 years. Do you really think they're that worried about climate change or the deficit? I mean, theoretically, we need young people who are more forward-leaning and looking. We need to create more room at the top. In addition, the final thing I'll say, Don, it's the kindest thing you can do. I serve on a bunch of public company boards, and I'm known as the asshole that gets to have hard conversations. Do you know how hard it is to tell an 80-year-old man who's been on a public company board for 30 years, who was the bomb, you need to step down from the board, when it's literally the only thing they have left professionally. And the kindest thing is to say, at a certain age, you're out. Go home. Spend time with your grandkids.
Well, hold that thought, because quickly, just a quick answer, if you will. Then I want a clear answer from you on, because this book is like, the media fell down on the job, and it's written by reporters, and they're getting criticism. And look, there's no shade to anyone. I know Jake. I'm a friend of Jake's, a former colleague. Um, I don't know. Is it the right time? Um, to be reporting on these things? Did the media actually fall down, and whose fault is it? Because it seems like it's, as much as you criticize Biden, you can also criticize Biden, you can criticize the Democratic Party, but the media was also to blame. And then now you're going back and saying we should have done better. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird to me.
Look, the left-wing media will always have a bias for President Biden. The right-wing media, you want to see a cover-up? Wait till Donald Trump starts showing signs of aging. Biology always wins.
He's already showing signs of aging.
But they're not talking about that. They're talking about his leadership and, oh, isn't he funny? And he's so authentic.
Right.
I mean, all this, they'll do the exact same thing. There's always a bias in media. Jake, and I think his co-author Alex, is that right? I had them on my podcast this week. They're getting
Alex Thompson. Yeah, there it is.
they're getting, in my opinion, unfairly pilloried. They have been sensationalists in their book. They're trying to make it more scandalous to sell more books. That's what we do when we promote books. But the notion that it was a cover-up, in my mind, just isn't accurate, because if it was a real cover-up, they wouldn't have let him out of the room to debate. That's what sunk him. What it was narcissism. I mean, Dianne Feinstein, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have paid an enormous price for their narcissism.
Oh my God, this is where I want to go with this, because had it not been, we're talking about the big, beautiful bill that was recently passed. If on all of these Democrats who would not resign, or, didn't read the room, as you say, like these big CEOs of companies or these board members, the Republicans might not have had a majority, or probably would not have, if these Democrats had decided to create a bench, get out earlier, promote some folks who could win in these blue states and blue areas. You wouldn't have had the big, beautiful bill, and you might not have had a Donald Trump. I'm not so sure about that. What are your thoughts?
We need more youth in the Democratic Party. We need.
I think seven of the members of Congress, I think the last seven to die were Democrats, and they were over the age of 70.
Average age is 63, or the oldest elected populace of any G7 country. And here's what really haunts us, Don. The child tax credit that was shown to take 40% of kids in poverty out of poverty right away. I didn't even think that's
Mm-hmm.
possible. You pass this thing.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it was $40 billion, which isn't a lot of
Mm-hmm.
money. It gets stripped out of the infrastructure bill because I hope someday that someone loves me the way that Chris and Cinema loves private equity and had it stripped out. The but the $120 billion cost of living adjustment in Social Security on top of the $1.2 trillion flies right through. Because here's the
Yeah.
bottom line: old people in America have figured out a way to vote themselves more money,
Yeah.
and
I, yeah.
young
I
people
was
are paying the
watching.
price.
Of course, of course. Look, I was watching Steve Ratner over on MSNBC talking about
Hmm.
this bill that passed, and he said if they had just gotten rid of these tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, and even they could have paid for, and also had and it would have taken $1 trillion, $1.1 trillion off of the deficit. They could have paid for the social safety net that they got rid of. Trying to get this bill passed. What do you think of that?
I think everything we do in our nation is an elegant transfer of wealth from the young to the old. Or put another way, people say, Scott, it's not the young to the old, it's the poor to the rich. That's the same thing. Who do you think the rich
Hmm.
are? Who do you think owns the
Hmm.
majority of stocks? People over the age
Hmm.
of 60.
You're a very
So,
wealthy man. Do you mind paying more taxes?
oh, I do everything I can to avoid taxes, and I will spend a lot of my money and time trying to elect people that reinstitute a progressive tax structure. Because
Really?
I'm so I'll be very transparent about my money. I hit my number 7 years ago. I decided I wanted to focus on relationships. I had become obsessed with money. I hit my number, and now every year when I meet with my money managers, they tell me how much more my wealth has grown above that number, and I either spend it because I love spending money. I'm really good at it. I have an amazing life. I do crazy, amazing things, and I give the rest away. Hoarding money is a virus that infects the 0.1%. There is no reason for anyone to have over $100 million. It makes you no happier. By the way, the myth that money doesn't buy happiness is bullshit. It does, except there's some
Yeah.
nuance. Middle
Yeah.
income people are happier than lower income. Upper income are
Hmm.
happier than middle income. But at a certain point, you get diminishing and then no returns. And Daniel Kahneman has shown that above a certain amount, you get no incremental returns. Now, billionaires are no less happy than millionaires. That's also a myth, but they're no happier, which says to me the following. If the whole point of an economy and a tax code and government is to create purpose, meaning, and happiness in people's lives, happiness not only comes from getting additional shit, and by the way, once you get to a certain point, you got all the stuff you need. It comes from an absence of certain things, specifically anxiety that you feel when you find out your wife has lung cancer, which also means you're going to go
Right.
bankrupt. So if you were to take, and I've gone full Bernie Sanders on this, I think above, say, 5 or 10 million bucks, we should have an alternative minimum tax of 50, 60, 70%. Because guess what? It's not going to reduce your happiness. Your take home pay of 9 million versus 13 million offers you no incremental happiness. But if you can take that $4 million in additional tax revenue and give $10,000 to 400 houses and take them from 40 to 50 in the form of a child tax credit, in the form of better Medicaid coverage, you are massively increasing the happiness of Americans. So, what do we have? We have a nation that has been co opted by the wealthy, where the 0.1% have tripled their wealth in the last 40 years on an inflation adjusted basis. And what do you know? Tax rates have gone from an average of 56% to 28%. We're in a doom loop of downward spiral as more wealth gets concentrated in the 0.1%, they're more unified with their lobbying and the regulatory capture, which results in lower taxes. We absolutely need to address income inequality. Corporations are paying their lowest taxes since 1929, and yet we have a bill that just passed that is going to be the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the young, from the poor to the rich or the young to the old in history. It's a
Hmm.
tax cut for the top 10% and a tax increase for the bottom 90. And the result is a $5 trillion increase in a deficit. And we as Democrats need to do a better job of phrasing things as they are. A deficit is a delayed tax on your children. Your kids are going to have to pay this shit back. And instead,
Hmm.
we have decided since George W. Bush that we can go to war and lower taxes at the same time. And we started a deficit train that Democrats and
Yeah.
Republicans have continued, and it needs to stop.
Since speaking of billionaires, because you and Kara talk about it a lot. Kara more than you, and that's Elon Musk, who found himself, involved, who got involved in politics, and then realized that it was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was not so good for his brand. If you look at what's happening with Tesla, right now. Do you believe, what do you think of him getting into politics? Um, what he's done over the past year? Because that interview with him that I did a year ago, I believe that it was prescient because all of the things that came to pass with him donating money, him talking about in the interview, he said that he told me there was a slow white genocide happening in South Africa, and then asked me if I cared about it, and I said I care about injustice anywhere, but there's no white genocide in South Africa. There's no evidence of it. But what do you think? Has he permanently diminished his company? Well, I would not count out Tesla. But what do you think of the whole Elon Musk of it all, Scott?
Well, your interview was actually sort of a turning point for him because up until that point, a lot of people would have said that his $250 million investment in the president was the best investment ever because Tesla skyrocketed because people thought he was going to get unearned
Hmm.
business from the government. But since then, the worm has really turned, and his net worth is down about $33 billion since the inauguration. And also, his politics have really hurt the brand. The brand's gone from being the eighth most revered brand to 95th in just a year. And if you look at sales, Don, Tesla is now the fastest declining in terms of revenue of any auto company in the world. It's down 20% year on year revenues. Its profits are down 71%. Its sales in France are down 59%, Sweden 81%, 74% in the Netherlands, 50% in Switzerland. In California, which is its biggest market, its sales are down double digit. In sum, he really screwed up here. And I think the reason he actually decided to fade to black was and it was fairly unnoticed, when the head of the province of Ontario said we're canceling our SpaceX contract, our Starlink
Mm.
contract. He all of a
Hmm.
sudden decided he wanted out of politics. So his
So he
brand has
saw
taken
where
a
it was
real hit.
going.
Oh
Do
yeah.
you believe his brand is taking a real hit? Look, it's interesting because I know people who gotten rid of their Teslas and they bought other electric vehicles. I see people who are using the Uber app, and if they see that the car is a Tesla that's coming to pick them up, they cancel it and they get another Uber.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how long you think that behavior will last because I'm sure there will be some innovation around autonomous cars and these taxis. Like I think he's worried about Waymo, right? He's
Hmm.
competing with them. But do you think there's permanent damage to the brand?
It's done. That's a question. Is it cyclical damage or is it structural? Look, at the end of the day, I think brands are mostly driven now on product innovation. So if he comes up with a great car, you don't want to count Tesla out, but it is incredibly overvalued. SpaceX and Starlink is still a better product. So as long as he has a better product, but this was an own goal. He didn't need to do this. A few years ago, he was probably the most admired man in the world, and now
Hmm.
he's become, I would say, with the exception of Trump, the most polarizing figure in the world. But the thing that kind of embodies America for me right now, and it was the most puncturing line I've heard in a while, was what Bill Gates said. Bill Gates said, "The world's wealthiest man is killing the world's poorest children." I
Hmm.
thought that was so devastating. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, there's some truth to that statement. And Elon Musk has gone from someone who people see, look, it's just a red flag when you're being sued concurrently by two different women for abandonment of your child. It's kind of a red flag. When you are giving Nazi salutes, that's kind of a red flag. When the Wall Street Journal reports that you're severely addicted to ketamine, that's a red flag. And yet, a lot of people still kind of look up to this guy and worship him because he can put a rocket into space and because he's the world's wealthiest man. I think it's kind of another example of kind of look at what money's done to us. That
There
if
was something that you said, Scott. I think this was you who said, "Where are the Elon Musk cancer centers around the country?" It wasn't that you. Didn't you say something like that?
look,
Where are what's his philanthropic efforts? I don't know. I'm not. I don't.
Bill Gates is trying to figure out a way to put vaccinations and malaria pills in people's poor kids' hands. And Elon Musk is cutting U.S. aid that is funding food kitchens in war-torn Ukraine, or hospice centers in parts of the world where people can't die with dignity. This is not only, in my opinion, immoral. It's stupid because the greatest advantage we have as a nation is a brand where people want to work with our companies, they want to invest in our stocks, they want to send their best and brightest to our universities, they want to consume our superhero films. That's based on the brand that is America. And that $75 billion says the following: okay, they're obnoxious, okay, they get it wrong sometimes, but you know what? We used to be the good guys, Don. we used to be the good guys. People saw America as getting it wrong, sometimes in the short, sometimes in the midterm. But we were the good guys. We were trying to do the right thing. And I think when we just summarily shut down hospitals, looking out for kids who are suffering from incurable diseases or trying to figure out a way to get what Bill Gates is doing, toilets to remote regions or potable water such that kids don't die from dysentery, and then you just cut that funding. That's why you want to be the world's wealthiest man. So I'm not an enormous fan. I think that both Elon Musk and Donald Trump right now serve as terrible role models for young men. I think they have conflated coarseness and cruelty with masculinity. I think they are not very good to the women in their lives, and I think that the most important thing in a young boy's life is to have a male role model. And it's shown right now in America, when you lose your dad through divorce or death, if it's a male, if it's a boy, he's more likely to end up incarcerated than graduate from college. And so when Elon Musk has 14 kids and, in my opinion, is kind of an absentee father, I mean, this is a guy who's not living with any of his children, sleeps with a loaded gun next to his bed, and is, according to the Wall Street Journal, addicted to ketamine. And yet we just think he's the bomb because he can put a rocket into space and he's really rich.
Okay, I want to play this, and I want you to just, when he asks me this question, I just want you to look at his face. Can you see through your computer? Can you see
Mm-hmm.
the what's on the screen? Okay, play this, and then we'll get Scott's reaction. Don't you think it's important to at least know the history of the country so that we can
I think we
move
should know
forward,
the
as you
history of
say?
our country in detail and that of other countries
Right.
and the history of the world.
And especially someone, South Africa. I mean, look at what happened with apartheid. It seems to me that you should be someone who is more understanding of that, considering where you came from, considering your history.
Yeah. There's a slow white genocide going on in South Africa. Do you care about that?
I care about all injustices. Do you think he's a racist?
Look, I just think where I go is the following. I don't think we can. And this is me boasting. I was supposed to be on Bill Maher. They told me Steve Bannon was going to be the interview. I canceled. I was on Bill Maher with you, and I canceled my latest appearance. And by the way, I love Bill Maher, and it's like my favorite thing to go on that show. I absolutely love it. I have a ton of respect for Bill and his team. I canceled because I'm like, I can't figure out a way to elegantly participate in a panel with a guy who's been giving Nazi salutes, and I refuse to normalize it. And I think that when I gave Elon the benefit of the doubt, and I watched it, any guy who's giving Nazi salutes, I don't know if he's a racist, but he is let me put it this way. He never says anything mean or untoward. They say, well, he has Tourette's, he just gets excited. He never says anything mean or controversial about the Chinese. He has a tendency to be very critical of the government and nations that respect his rights for free speech. But when he's talking about Turkey or China, he's very disciplined and measured. So I think this guy knows exactly what he does. So I don't know if he's a racist. I don't know what he's like deep down. I think he's a conspiracy theorist. I think the notion that somehow there's a genocide in South Africa. I go to Cape Town all the time as a white guy. I do not feel unsafe. I have never seen any evidence or seen any credible reporting that there's anything resembling a white genocide in South Africa. And for him, that was a misdirect from your honest question. I think the injustices in South Africa, I think a quote unquote white genocide would be pretty hard to get in the top 100 of things that are the significant problems in South Africa. I think I refuse to normalize Nazi salutes. And if it's an accident, then don't make that fucking mistake again. Don't ever do anything that looks like it accidentally. You are the wealthiest man in the world. You are a role model for young people. You should have more discipline than to do anything that remotely could either be interpreted or seen as a mistake as a Nazi salute. You are normalizing it. You are giving young disenfranchised men who don't have the same economic opportunities that you enjoy moving from South Africa to the U.S. You are normalizing something that could lead to a very, very dark place. So whatever, Nazi sympathizer. I won't call him a racist, so I don't know what that means.
I just want to put up the video, this low audio, because I want Scott to speak over it. I think everyone has seen this moment in the Oval Office where he's with the South African president, and then he puts up videos, and then he just really. promotes conspiracy theories about a so-called white genocide in South Africa. What it made me embarrassed, quite frankly, to be in America, and I love America. I was just, it was, let's put it this way, it was secondhand embarrassment for the president from me, for me.
This was the most embarrassing thing since that ambush of the guy
Zelensky.
who is trying to push back on a murderous autocrat. We send them a little bit of money. They sacrifice their young men to try and stop a murderous autocrat invading Europe again. I thought that was embarrassing. Trump just looks like an ass here. He looks like a conspiracy theorist, and he looks like an ass. But that, in my opinion, is nothing compared to us embarrassing and showing a lack of manners in the Oval Office for a guy pushing back and being the front line at huge, huge personal risk and risk to his and death and cost to his brothers and sisters in Ukraine. I thought that was absolutely the most embarrassing moment in American history in a while. The scariest stat I've seen is that for the first time in history, more people globally see China as a force of good than America. And I think that is directly in 103 days, we've gone from a nation. I always like to make the economic argument. Our S&P stocks trade at a P of 26, meaning for every dollar our great companies and profits earn, we get $26 in wealth.
Yeah.
Japan gets 18, Germany 22, and China 14. And part of the reason is risk capital, aggressive entrepreneurship, great IP, great universities, but also rule of law and consistency. And in the last 115 days, rule of law and consistency have gone out the window, which means to me that over the next 5 or 10 years, we are going to become dramatically less wealthy as our multiple on the profits we generate in America go way down. I'm sick of screaming into TikTok about the morality of all this. I think Democrats make the mistake of believing that everybody values social virtue over an increase in the material and psychological well-being of citizens actually on the ground. So the argument I'm trying to make is this guy is such an idiot and has damaged our reputation so dramatically that every company and nation in the world is trying to figure out a way to reroute their supply chain around us. For the first time in 40 years, there's huge outflows out of U.S. markets into European markets, which means the following, Don. All of us who indirectly or directly participate in the stock market are about to become much less wealthy because people don't want to invest in a market that stands for toxic uncertainty. People don't want to invest in a market that stands for grift. There's no accident that he skipped Israel and Turkey because they're still, quote unquote, democracies or near democracies that aren't going to give the guy a fucking 747 or give $1 billion hand job to his sons when they show up. So we have gone from rule of law and consistency to toxic uncertainty and grift. That is the American brand right now. And to believe that is not really going to damage the valuations the world markets put on our companies and affect all of our wealth, whether it's an increase in interest rates, which we're seeing, or an inability to attract the cheap capital, or even worse, America has been the place where the best and brightest want to come. And now we're seeing Chinese, UK, and German companies start to pick off our best and brightest scientists saying, all right, do you really want to put up with the bullshit of being attacked at a university under this bullshit flag of anti-Semitism? Donald Trump doesn't give a shit about anti-Semitism.
Nothing.
He cares about trying to emasculate centers of critical thought which lead to more progressive values, so he's using this as a false flag. Does the Ivy League have real problems around anti-Semitism? 100%.
But not the way he's not the way.
Yeah, but to think the way you solve that is by cutting research in vaccines
is ridiculous. Yeah.
or diabetes medication. The greatest investment the U.S. has ever made is our governmental investments through our universities in research. It's paid enormous dividends. I don't care if you're Google or Apple. These things are built on the backbone of investments made through universities in infrastructure and investments that the company private sector wouldn't make. Yeah. So we are going to get much less wealthy because of this president and because of his reckless, sclerotic, indifferent, unpredictable economic actions. He put on a 145% tariff on China, and then without any negotiation or talk, he reduced it to 30%. People just don't know what to expect from us anymore.
Yeah. Scott Galloway. Scott, also, I want to thank you. I appreciate what you're doing in the world. I love listening to you guys. Don. You know that I'm a friend of yours and a friend of the program. But I also want to let folks know he doesn't just talk about this. Scott, you had a dinner where you wanted to get men together to talk about the issues that you discuss and about boys and about being a man. You invited me to that dinner. I appreciate that. I have some advice for you or some questions, but I'll do that offline. And I just want to thank you for coming on the program. I hope that you come back. Continued success and happiness. Thank you.
Thanks, brother, and congrats to you on all your success.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching. Your support means the world to us. So make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe to our channel to make sure that you never ever miss a video. We're live every day, 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop even more content at 2 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern. And if you want more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon community, where you will receive access to special community posts. You'll get exclusive content and members-only live shows. So head over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching. We appreciate your love and your support, and we will see you next time.